Deputies Kevin Humphreys, Brendan Ryan, Robert Dowds and Aodháin O'Riordáin. To the Minister for the Environment, Community and Local Government, the need to ensure the maintenance of existing grants and funding for the 4 Dublin local authorities. The Deputies have 8 minutes in total for an initial statement. That's 2 minutes each. Deputy Humphreys.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll let the Minister catch his breath, as I see he's just after racing into the chamber. Minister, as you know, next year's local authorities receive 80% of local property tax raised in our area, and most of it raised in Dublin. It is projected that Dublin City Council will receive about 60 million from a yield of 80 million in the city area alone from property tax. May I point it out to the Minister, that's 10 times more than that will be paid in Louth, where Louth will pay approximately 8 million in property tax, where Dublin will pay 80. Dublin will get 2.6 million from the local government fund, and Louth will get 8 million. This can hardly be questioned as being fair. Of the 80 million that will be raised, 16 million of Dublin City Council homeowners tax will subsidise local authorities who do not raise enough in their own areas. And I have absolutely no problem with a centralised fund and an equalisation mechanism, as long as all the counties are treated similarly, equally and fairly, which I say that the Dublin areas, the 4 local Dublin areas, have not been today. There has been, to my mind, a great discrimination against the 4 local Dublin areas. Can I say there's been a lot of media speculation that the grants paid to government, to councils will be slashed, and especially to the 4 local Dublin city authorities, because the fact that we will pay so much property tax, there will be an amount of money that will be kept within the authority, and then the government will slash the local grants. They will take with one hand and give nothing back. There's about 52 million paid from the Department of Environment to Dublin City Council alone, and I'll leave the 3 other local authorities alone. Those pay for housing building programmes, they pay for the adaptation grants, they pay for subsidies to homelessness. Minister, in the middle of a housing crisis, we can't reduce any money to the homeless sector or to house building within the Dublin area. So I expect you, if you're still in your position next week, or if you're elevated to a more senior position, I expect you to ensure that Dublin gets its fair share, which it hasn't. We're in the middle of a housing crisis,
Deputy, your time
and
is
it would
up now,
be
yes.
lunacy for this to be discriminated, and Dublin is at the heart of it. Minister, I conclude in saying this. I expect a high standard for you. I expect you to defend Dublin, and I expect you to make sure that Dublin gets its fair share.
Yeah. The next speaker is Deputy Brendan Ryan. You have 2 minutes, Deputy.
Thank you, Minister. It is very concerning to hear reports that central funding to local authorities in the Dublin area could be reduced. This is particularly worrying as we are currently right in the teeth of a housing crisis, which is seeing ordinary people and families thrust into homeless services on a daily basis. At this point in time, local authorities in Dublin, including my own area of Fingal, need increased funding to tackle this crisis. And the crisis is significantly a Dublin problem, although other rural areas are affected as well. There is insufficient funding available for essential and urgent housing adaptation based on assessed medical needs. Any reduction in central funding would equate to Dubliners being punished for paying property tax. My own area, Fingal, contributed €18.4 million in local property taxes last year and had the second highest compliance rate of any local authority in the country last year, with 94.6% of households paying the charge. This high compliance rate, I believe, is part due to a recognition from local people that their local services are under financial strain and need further funding. It should not result, in my view, in reduced central funding. Fingal and other Dublin councils already receive a much lower per capita funding from central government than other councils around the country. Fingal, particularly the newly constituted operations department, are working hard to do more with less. To get more open spaces cut with less personnel. To get paths built and potholes fixed to improve road and pedestrian safety. The money taken in by the LPT is not a bonanza, as is being reported in some areas of the media. It is money which should go towards people on housing adaptation lists, to get stalled community centre projects off the ground and to invest in tackling the housing and homelessness crisis. This money will not cure all the challenges facing local government, far from it. It will only moderately relieve the strain placed on our local authorities. And finally, it is vital that central government do not give with one hand and take away with the other. Thank you,
Thank you, Deputy. Next speaker is Deputy Robert Dowds. You have 2 minutes.
Well, I have to bang the same drum as my colleagues, and particularly Deputy Brendan Ryan, because like him, I represent a developing county, which means that we have much greater need of input into local authorities. And I represent a county that has consistently got the least per capita from the local government fund. $500,000, I think, was the figure for last year. And the fact that Dubliners are paying so much more in terms of local property tax than people from the more rural areas. I appreciate that counties, say, like Kildare and indeed your own, would be a bit higher than many rural areas. The fact that we are paying so much more in terms of property tax should not lead to a discriminatory situation whereby we lose out on grants. And like my colleagues have said, we very much urgently need money, particularly in the area of housing and homelessness. In my own county, there are 50 people waiting for emergency housing accommodation, and most of those are living in hotels, and so we cannot afford in any way to lose out on central government grants. So I would urge you to look after our needs in that regard and not punish us because our people are paying more in the way of property tax than others. There are other ways to address the disparities in the collection of local property tax, which could be considered if that's the path that has to be looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. The last speaker is Deputy Aodháin O'Riordáin. You have 2 minutes, Deputy.
Thanks, Dr. Hirlich. Minister, you know during the bubble period that when the state was over-reliant on stamp duty and VAT as source of income, that it was people in Dublin who disproportionately contributed to the coffers of the state and those in the commuter belt. And to come out of that situation into a new situation where we'll be doubly punished because of the property prices in Dublin and the local property charge will be again extremely unfair. You know that council services benefit the most vulnerable in our society. It is the poorest who benefit from council services, be it housing, be it sheltered accommodation, be it library services, be it parks, playgrounds, be it all these essential services that councils provide, benefit the poorest, the most vulnerable, those who need public services most. The suggestion that government central grants to Dublin City Council or any of the Dublin councils will be affected because of receipts
1 minute left, Deputy.
from local property tax is patently unfair. So given the historical context of what happened during the bubble period, given the bankrupt nature of that funding mechanism, given the fact that Dubliners were unfairly treated during that period of time, to doubly disadvantage those in the Dublin region with a suggestion that central government funds would be cut because of the nature of the new local property tax regime will be doubly unfair. And I would ask you to ensure that the most vulnerable, and Dublin, I would suggest, does have a higher proportion of marginalised and disadvantaged communities who depend on council services for their very survival, will not be cut off from central government.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister, you have 4 minutes for...
I'd like to thank the deputies for raising this very important matter, which I take on behalf of my colleague Minister Hogan, the Minister for the Environment. There has indeed been a lot of discussion in recent months on the issue of local property tax and how local retention of that tax might impact on local authorities into the future. It is a complex issue that will need much consideration as the estimates process for 2015 progresses. The Departments of Public Expenditure and Reform, Finance, Transport, Tourism and Sport and Environment and Local Government have together been examining the implications of local retention and indeed variation of local property tax in recent months. They have considered a wide range of issues, including the implications of the 80% local retention of LPT and of the new power that local authorities have with effect from this very day to vary the basic rate by up to 15%, and how these policies might potentially impact on the overall Exchequer financial position and the financial position of individual local authorities. 2014 and 15 will be particularly challenging, given that they are going through the most fundamental structural changes since the foundation of the state, on top of a significant restructuring in relation to water services and completely changed funding and service delivery models. These changes to the local government funding model will need to be very carefully managed. The departments concerned are actively considering the issues arising from these changes, and following consideration by government, local authorities will be advised of the outcome. In terms of local retention, the government has indicated its intention to move to 80% retention of the tax from 2015. A decision to allow local authorities to retain 80% locally and the power to vary LPT rates will facilitate further implementation of the local government reform programme, a core element of which involves greater devolution to the local government sector through supporting enhanced local decisions supporting enhanced local decision making on spending priorities. Minister Hogan fully recognises that it is necessary for government to provide funding certainty for local authorities as early as possible, which will be absolutely essential so that they can meet their budgetary obligations and to consider the question of whether or not to vary the LPT for 2015 by the end of September of this year. There is need to recognise that the LPT base outside the cities and main commuter zones is narrower, and there will be a requirement to equalise the income position of these local authorities in order to ensure that an acceptable standard of service delivery is maintained right across the country. The issue of LPT allocations, both from local retention rates and from any subsequent income provided to local authorities to equalise distribution across the state, are matters for the Minister's department, and one which he considers essential to resolve as soon as possible. He will continue to work with government colleagues to ensure that information in respect of these decisions is available to local authorities to facilitate their budgets. In relation to provision of other central government grants to local authorities, this is a matter that will be considered as part of the estimates process. The Minister for the Environment, Community and Local Government and Minister of State in his department will engage with the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform in this regard, particularly in relation to funding for housing matters, which is a significant source of funding for local authorities from central government currently. The matter of overall housing grant allocations for 2015 is, of course, inextricably linked with the new social housing strategy being pursued by our colleague, Minister of State for Housing, John O'Sullivan, and which is expected to be finalised by the end of September. The level of central government grant funding to be provided to local authorities from other departments is a matter for those departments, or the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, Minister Holland.
Thank you, Minister. The four deputies have 4 minutes in total for a supplementary statement. That's half a minute each, deputies.
Okay, and I'm going to be very brief, Minister. You said it's a complex issue. Let me put this back in very simple terms. Do not try and rip off Dublin. Because, can I just...
Without interruption.
Yeah, it's not a debate, Minister. I'm replying to you. Do not try and rip off Dublin. Home values in the Dublin area since 2013 has nearly doubled. And this is another problem that needs to be addressed.
You'll have to conclude now, Deputy.
No, you said a minute. It's 4 minutes. It's a minute each.
It is 8... Sorry.
Yeah, 4 minutes.
I beg your pardon. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. I can add on the time you just used to interrupt me. House prices in the Dublin area has nearly doubled since 2013 due to a factor of shortage in the Dublin area. It's driven the prices up. Dublin residents and householders can't be punished for this. So I'm saying to you, Minister, one of two things needs to be done. Local councils need to give the power of varying the local property tax, if it's going to be called a local property tax, by 50%, or they should be given the property values should be frozen at 2013 valuations for the property tax until the market settles. And I ask for those two issues to be looked at and to be answered back. And again, I will say to you, Minister, I will be watching very carefully, as you'll probably be promoted. And I'll be saying it to my own party colleagues,
way over your
I will not stand for Dublin to be ripped off. And let's get that very clear.
Okay. The next speaker is Deputy Robert Dowds. You have 1 minute. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Deputy Brendan Ryan, you have 1 minute.
Minister, I want to reiterate, we need to increase our support to local government to help them meet the challenges our citizens face every day, from the run-of-the-mill to the extraordinary challenge of not having a stable roof over your head. We need to invest, not reduce. We have a crisis in housing and our local authorities are on the front line. Any diminution in funding through central grants will weaken our chances of beating that crisis, and Dublin councils must not be treated less favourably than any other councils. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Robert Dowds, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. We will be in a very rebellious state if we do not make progress on this, because it is unacceptable for Dublin to be discriminated against in relation to other counties. And I agree with Deputy Humphrey's comment in terms of future property taxes in Dublin, given the change of house prices. And it really does raise the question of going back to look at how property tax is calculated, and there would be ways of making a fairer calculation across the country in that regard. But being from the county that has always got the least out of the local government fund, I will be watching this extremely carefully to ensure that we are not deprived of funding, particularly in relation to the whole housing crisis.
Thank you, Deputy. Last speaker, Deputy Aodháin O'Riordáin. 1 minute.
I mean, just to reiterate the point, I mean, last year the Dublin City Council budget was passed, scraped through, and last-minute proposals from the city management in terms of the cut in the home services, cut in adaptation grants for disabled, and a potential 14% increase in rents in local authority tenants didn't happen because of an intervention from government. Now, without an intervention from government, ongoing, sustainable and continued, the services that protect the most vulnerable in Dublin City, Dublin local authorities, will not be able to sustain themselves. So, Minister, this is a matter of equality, it's a matter of social solidarity, and it's important to underpin the essential services of housing, community infrastructure, the library services, etc., with a sustainable funding, yes, from the local property tax, which I support, but also from the central government to ensure that those services can continue into the future and not have any sort of a threat lying over them year to year.
Thank you, Deputy. The Minister has 2 minutes for a concluding
statement. I'd like to assure Deputy Humphreys in particular that this government is not ripping off the people of Dublin. I have no intention of doing so. And I put it to you, I would put it to you, Deputy, that, the facts are very simple. I've said it very clearly, and I repeat that it is 80%, regardless of where you live. The government, your government and my government, your ministers and mine, are committed to that, and that is a fact. And we're also committed to the certainty, the financial certainty that you and I want, whether it's in Dublin or Drogheda or Cork or Kerry or Limerick or Tipperary. We have to run a country, but we have to make sure that it's run fairly and that all of our communities get the funding that they're entitled to and they get a fair proportion of what they actually pay. It is a fact that the issue of housing is particularly significant, obviously, in Dublin. And it is a fact that the Minister for Housing, Minister O'Sullivan, who is a Labour Party Minister, very strongly puts forward all of the proposals which were recently supported by all of us to improve housing, particularly in the Dublin area, particularly the funding to put back into living use the houses which are boarded up right around the city and indeed right around the country, and to meet all of those needs. It is also a fact that one of the biggest issues for Dublin is the water supply of Dublin, and we need to spend £500 million, 500 million, over the next 3 or 4 years to ensure that Dublin has the water supply that it deserves and that it's entitled to. And I put it to you, Deputy, that we're not not ripping off anybody. We're ensuring that there's fair and equitable distribution of funding, that everybody gets 80% of what they pay in, and that the balance then goes to some counties and some areas that don't have the funding to maintain basic services. Minister Hogan is firmly of the view that certainty is important in this significant time, and he will continue to work with government colleagues to ensure the necessary budgetary information is available. Grant allocations from central government is a matter of the estimates, and the Minister for the Environment, along with other ministers, will continue to engage with Minister Howland, the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, in this regard. So I just want to say that we agree all on the issue that 80% should be spent where it's raised, and that there should be fairness and equity right across the whole country, and that particularly the needs of Dublin hopefully will be met out of the funding that is raised, and properly so, and so it should be.
Thank you, Minister. We now move on to the Radiological Protection Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2014, order for report and final stages. Firstly, Minister, can you move that the report stage now be taken? Move. Is that agreed? Okay. So we now move on to